and I'm really delighted to have so many here this afternoon. I'm the careers manager for science and engineering, and I'm delighted to have with me today Geoff Grier from Airbus. And I'm just going to give a brief bio of Geoff, and feel free to correct any inaccuracies, Geoff, that or any anything that's libelous or anything like that. And then I'll just ask him a few questions. If you want to contribute and ask some questions, and we really hope you will, because it's your session. It's not often you get somebody like Geoff in front of you able to ask questions of him. Just put them in the Q&A, and we'll see if we can get through some of them. So Geoff's, as Simone has said, Geoff's an alumnus of the University of Glasgow, and he graduated in 1996. I started at Glasgow in September 96, so thankfully for Geoff, he didn't have to get any careers advice from me, I don't suppose. So with a degree in Aerospace Engineering, and I think I'm right in saying that you were, is this correct, that you were awarded the Royal Aeronautical Society Award for top student?
Yeah, I believe so.
That's brilliant. Brilliant. Well done. You can't remember now. And
well, my parents would probably say it wasn't that well deserved, because I spent a lot of time in the Glasgow Union. But yeah.
Well, we've just been hearing a lot today of the need for social skills and softer skills as well as the tech skills. So I think that probably maybe wasn't wasted in the union as well. Anyway, so you're now head of quality for Airbus Commercial Aircraft in Singapore.
Yep.
You've worked for Rolls-Royce as well, and you've joined their joint ventures in aero engine maintenance and laterally with Airbus, as you've said. You started in Scotland, but you've included periods working in the States. For the last 8 years, you've been in Singapore, which has been probably very interesting. You maybe talk about that as well, and covered a wide variety of different aircraft, from the BAE Jetstream 41 turboprop, it says, I can just about pronounce that, through to the mammoth Airbus A380. So, I don't know, it'd be great, Geoff, you could just give us a brief history of your career thus far, maybe including the GUU, and what have been your career highs, and if I can use that term, so far as well.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I think I was fortunate at the time that I was graduating from Glasgow University. Rolls-Royce were in a recruiting campaign for graduates, and I joined their graduate training scheme, very much hands-on around the maintenance repair facility in East Kilbride. Pretty old style buildings, it's no longer there. Rolls moved to Shinnon. And I worked my way through a program there, ultimately becoming one of the production managers running the area for repair and overhaul on two of the engines, the Dart turboprop, and then probably the one that more people will be aware of is the Pegasus engine for the Harrier jump jet. And that was a real kind of good fundamental understanding, taking what I'd done in university and bringing it into real style engineering with Rolls-Royce. And then from there, I was very fortunate, and I think this is one of the pieces of advice I regularly give to the young graduates that I see in Singapore. I got myself a mentor in Rolls-Royce who was in the business, got very good advice from him, and he brought me out to Singapore to work in the Singapore joint venture, doing the Trent engine, which was the big one at the time, was on the Boeing 777, and then latterly the A340. So went from military engines to large civil engines, and then back into Scotland for a period of time where I'd met my wife, and then over to America. A lot of times, when I look back in my career, there were sort of funny moments which defined what I did or the next job I did. And I think the other key piece I look back on is when people you respect say, I think you should go and do that job, you go and do it. You sometimes think, I'm not sure if it is right for me, but if somebody else you trust thinks it is, go do it. It's not always the kind of the sexiest job, but it's the one that might get you the best experience. And that took me to America. So the working around the shop floor in East Kilbride really gave me the selling feature to go to what was the biggest single aisle joint venture that Rolls had in international aero engines with V2500. They were looking for people with what we call aftermarket knowledge. So went out there, had a great time. on some of the big customer contracts we've got, involved in selling engines right the way through to managing it with Airbus, and then back out to Singapore with Rolls-Royce to look after the whole Trent fleet that Singapore Airlines had with Rolls-Royce. And from there, as quite often people will do, I chose to stay in Singapore rather than go back to the UK. And that moved me to Airbus, where my role as head of quality involves what we classify as airworthiness, so fleet technical management. It's a combination of engines and airframe. And I get the chance, which most people in aviation are aviation geeks. Nobody in Airbus in the services business doesn't enjoy a day when we get to see an A380 up close. And we get to play with it every day and looking after it. So it is just a huge aircraft. And so that's where pretty much we are today. In the region, we look after 1,600 Airbus aircraft, from A320s, A220s, right the way through A380s to A350s. So very kind of diverse set of work that we do, and a diverse set of customers. I've got customers who like to talk to me about decals in the cabin, and I know more about really detailed parts of aircraft than ever thought I wanted to. I certainly know more about toilets than ever wanted to know. And I know more about what you would describe as the fundamentals around some of the fuselage structures, the cockpits, and what some of the capabilities of the aircraft are. So, and one of the things that was very keen to kind of help out with this is we do speak to the schools in Singapore. We're really keen. Airbus supports heavily the STEM system in the UK. We've kind of adopted that in Singapore, and we're out speaking to the schools, be it primary schools, Cubs, Scouts, right the way through to the polytechnics and universities, and trying to help people kind of guide what did I do and how could they make use of that. And if out of that one or two people get an inkling of what they could do, then that's great. That helps the next generation coming into aerospace. We need some of the great minds to come into aerospace, because there are some real engineering challenges coming down the line. We've reached the end of the kind of current design capability of aircraft and engines. You can't make them run hotter. You can't make them run much bigger. So we're now at the next level, and clearly the environmental issues drive everybody to do something different.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of leads me on to the next question I've got written down here, which is how do you see the future of aviation, Geoff, given the climate change emergency and moving towards more sustainable transport methodologies? And before I get you to answer that, I just think it's really interesting that you're going out doing that, because as careers advisors, we don't want to tell people what to do or say, oh, do this, do that, but we want to let people make the most informed choices they can. And what you're doing then, going into schools and going into talking to youth organisations and all of that, it's so important that people can see what it's really about and learn and then make that choice. I think so. I think that's fantastic. But so when you're talking to them, and do you talk about the future as well? How do you see the future?
What we actually use these talks. I mean, it's one of the things I think I would say you mentioned earlier about some of the kind of the softer skills. We have a lot of people who are very, very good technically, and then without being disrespectful to them, if we put them in front of a difficult situation with a customer, they become a bit like a rabbit in front of the headlights, and they're not the people we know day to day. So giving them these opportunities to speak to students, which can give you any question in the whole of aerospace, really challenges them to kind of learn more about the company and be confident that you're not always going to have the answer, and you have to then think, how do you get something sensible around that? So we use it as a good development tool for our teams. I've never had one of these. I've been speaking to 4-year-olds. Some of the 4-year-olds ask brilliant questions, and it goes everywhere from the green environment of an aircraft, its emissions footprint, through to fuel burn, to why is a black box called a black? Because it's bright orange. And there's lots of when you get asked these questions, you really have to kind of go away and research them. So But where will aerospace go next? I mean, I think Airbus would say we've pushed for long-haul aircraft. It's very difficult to do kind of hydrogen electric flight for certain distances. So really the next evolution is probably an iteration of what we have today. But the A350, if we take the A350, I mean, it burns 25% less fuel than its competing kind of current aircraft. So that by its emissions footprint is significantly lower. I think Airbus is doing something called city taxis, which our chief technical officer, who's our ex-chief technical officer who's just moved to Rolls-Royce, a fantastically educated Italian lady. Her successor is a German lady, and she's really into the Airbus taxis, where we're looking at really short run, kind of electric powered mini helicopters, almost kind of big drones that allow 4 or 5 people to move about quickly. And that is probably one of the areas where, particularly in congested space like Japan, you could really do something to reduce the emissions from cars, because aviation's not the big carbon footprint that a lot of people like to kind of tar it with. Yes, it's got work to do, but there are other industries that really have a much bigger way to go. But aircraft and aerospace has a way to do something with it, and that will be through either short mode of transport or short run aircraft, where there are electric aircraft which are feasible. And my dad worked for an airline called Logan Air in Scotland, which many people may have heard of. And they are actively going to trial an electric aircraft in the Orkney Islands, where it's really short runs. So I think that's where the most likely next developments are. But from an engineering point of view, we really need, I said, we need people who've got the ability to push the boundary line, because a lot of what we've got today are people who've been doing it for 30 years, who are very, very technically good. But what's next? And that's where the kind of the graduates of today will become the people who change aviation for the future.
And that's really interesting. And you know, I suppose that it leads on to the thought about skill sets and what you need people to have when they come into the industry. So you've talked a lot about that, about softer skills and be able to cope with being in front of clients, etc., and talking more about policy maybe and that kind of thing. What are the skill sets you think required to work in aviation? How are they changing? Are they changing because of sustainability, and what are they, and what do you look for in people?
I mean, I think that the thing that we see across, and a number of times I've done graduate recruitment or young career recruitment, we expect people to have a basic fundamental knowledge, which comes from certain universities, engineering degrees. We accept that as the given. Then we're looking for how really will people sit inside a team. We need people to be team players, and by that we mean people who have an ability to interact with all levels. So with a great kind of analogy here, when I used to work for Rolls-Royce, I always used to have a chat to the security guard at the front gate. We want people who can talk to the security guard, the janitor, the person that cleans the toilet, right up to the CEO, and be as comfortable in that dialogue and what you would talk to these people about, different levels of people. And that's a skill. The other area that we're really focused on is there's going to be a digital revolution in aerospace, and people who know how to manage digital tools. We run a system called Skywise, which is an IT platform that does a lot of analytics for us. The more people are capable on that type of platform, where you've got analytics knowledge and a bit more understanding of what happens in the background. I don't profess to be any analytics specialist, but I do my best to try and understand what is the tool actually telling us, because you need to be able to challenge the tools and say, is this doing the right thing? Is it actually giving you what we call a straw man test? Does it just look right? And if it doesn't look right, go and dig in. So that kind of analytics knowledge, bit of programming capability never hurts. And something I always like to say, something that makes people stand out. We see hundreds of CVs, particularly in France and Germany, for each job. So what is it that makes you stand out? And I'm not looking for a CV that's kind of 4 or 5 pages long. I'm looking for people who are able to write concisely, quickly on a piece of paper what they've done and give me something that makes them stand out. I'm not expecting people to be an Olympic athlete. I'm not expecting people to be a kind of chess grandmaster. But what is it that makes you stand out? And that really is one of the most important things that people can get on their CV. Something that makes you different. Do you support a charity? What is it that you do that makes you be a better person? And that'll stand out in a CV.
I think that's really interesting. And that's the message that we say all the time. And, you know, it's really important to get your degree, obviously, and your grades are people fixating it. But when you apply for a job, you're going to be up against people with the same degree, the same tech stuff. So it's the other stuff that makes that difference, doesn't it? And I suppose for me, it's like, well, what do you think? You've mentioned there about some of the things you look for there, you know, work for a charity or whatever. Can you you do a lot of recruitment, Geoff. Can you give me some stories about people that have had that in CV, some of the things that you've been interested in?
Yeah, there's a guy we recruited for Rolls-Royce in the customer service centre. I mean, he was the quietest guy you could ever imagine. This guy was what I would describe as a real introverted engineer. We used to have these, so we were in one of these open plan offices, and he was one of these people that always chose the same desk, wanted to sit at the same desk each time. And people would ask us, he just doesn't kind of say too much. He doesn't. And then said, I'd ask him what he does. And then he was like, he had it on his CV, I like to climb mountains. And then somebody said to him, and then, well, what mountains do you like to climb? And this guy opened up. And this became his subject, where he was like, well, I climbed Kilimanjaro, and I did it in this time. And I don't just walk up them, I run up them. And it was like, you what? And he's like, I run up them. I like to beat my personal best up these mountains each time. And it's like, I like that. That's something where if you can tell somebody you've got a dedication and a drive to do something, you become the person that people want, because it shows that you've got an ability. And he ran through this, and my PB time on this mountain is this. And I was like, what? This is a guy we need to get in the team. Because he put an engineering problem in front of him, he shows the same logic. He does it quietly. He doesn't do it kind of boasting about it, but he shows the same level of determination. I think the best example I've ever had of somebody that I used to live nearby in Scotland, it's not an engineering example. He was an engineer, but he set up a dry cleaning business, and he was looking for some money to kind of set up this small business. And a money lender went to see him to do a small loan, and he said, look, I'm not really seeing the business plan here. And he asked this guy, what is it you do at the weekend? And this guy said, I swam around Millport. Now, to swim around Millport is about 5.8 miles. And this money lender said to him, you did what? And he said, I swam around Millport. And he said, you swam 5.8 miles in the open sea? And he said, yeah. And he said, well, any guy that can swim 5.8 miles in the open sea is clearly worth my money. And he gave him his loan, and off he went, and he made a fortune from it. But it's that differentiate. I mean, we see a lot of people who are really keen aviation people, and that's great. Love people that can show their aviation knowledge. I showed a year 8 class in Singapore. I pulled out a big Airbus A380 model, one of our marketing models, and this guy who's 12 years old said to me as I'm pulling it out of the box, oh, that's the A350-900. I thought you were going to bring an A350-1000. And I was like, and it's got no wheels down, it's not. And I said, how is it you exactly know that's an A350-900? And he said, I counted the windows between the number 2 and number 3 exit. Now that is knowledge that people in aviation like. And it's just, when people have that knowledge and interest, it drives people to say, that's what I was like when I was younger. I'm going to take them. So giving something that associates to that. So if you're an airplane geek, absolutely fantastic, but go out and research it and make sure that if you go to talk to an engine company, that you know their products before you. It doesn't have to be technically expert, but just know the products, and that makes you stand out. And we've had that kind of quite a few times in interviews over here where people have really shown they've just got an in-depth knowledge of aviation, and it's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. I think the what I pick up from that, and it's a good message to give to students, I think, is that you need to just be yourself, just do stuff. and follow your passions, and it will lead to things that you maybe don't expect. It'll show skills that you don't do it necessarily to get those skills, but just do it, and you've no idea what it'll be. Now, we've got quite a few questions, Geoff, thankfully, from people here, so that's great. Right, let's see if I can fit. Right. A lot of people want to ask, how are job interviews in terms of difficulty? Are there usually questions that might as well be exam questions with Airbus, or is it the interview more about the CV, resume, and maybe more about their soft skills? What do you think? Or are there more than one type of interview? How would you answer that?
I think my honest answer to that is I actually challenge our own people to go for an interview, a minimum of apply for a job. If you like a job and you apply for it, always have the mindset, if I get offered this, I'm going to take it. So don't just apply for jobs because it's a good thing to do. But when you apply for a job, doing an interview is never a bad thing. And whatever the result of the interview, always go back and ask for feedback, because you'll learn something. And what you'll find is generally there's a trend in interviews. And what you're able to do is then say, if this is a competence-based discussion, you'll understand what the competencies are. And you'll remember questions about, well, what was my answer to that competence question? But can you give me a time that you did this? And you'd think back later and think, maybe I had a better example. But I always say to people, why don't you write down, if you write out what you think your top 10 competencies are and what your examples that you might bring to them, have that with you so you can then pull those out and say, I'd like to make sure I cover the right areas. So I think more and more interviews are competency based. You kind of get to the interview by being what we would describe as baseline technical. So you've met the minimum qualifications of the interview. And after that, we're looking to find out, what are you like? What's your kind of thought process? And that's where competencies come in. But really, I think there is never a bad interview. I've done interviews before where I've gone back and I've said to people, actually, in second thoughts, I don't want to do that job. Obviously, you've got to say it a wee bit better than that, but I've got a different option, or but I'd still like to get the feedback. And they'll give you, most people will genuinely give you feedback to say, this was a good answer, this was a poor answer, you could have done better here, I saw something in your CV you didn't bring out. So you want to go through your own CV and make sure you've got your kind of top 10 things you want to bring out, and then try and bring them out. And that's the skill of an interview, to make sure that you get across what you want to say, and trying to kind of make the question that you've got turn around to the answer that you want to give. And the other bit of advice I would always give in interviews, and I always give it in feedback, we're not looking for people to immediately jump into an answer. So there's nothing wrong with taking like a 2 or 3 or 5 second, I'm just thinking about that. Some of the people I work with out here who are speak all the time, they'll never answer a question immediately. They'll always have that gap where they just sit back and then they answer. And it gives them that 5 seconds to think, what one am I going to go for here? And I think that's a strong piece of advice. So when you get, I never did it when I was at university, and I kind of probably wish I had. When you have the option to go and do an interview, a kind of a dummy interview, or go and do a CV writing course. I was down at GU playing hockey or football, but those were real things that can get you well set up for the first time you get an interview. Because when you do it for real, your hands are sweating for the first time. It's just a case of the more you do it, the better you get at it.
I think that's right, Geoff. And I'm not blowing our own trumpet here, but we've got lots of stories of students who've come to a careers talk on interviews, or a session, or a practice interview, as you say, and it's made a huge difference to them when they've gone in for that real one. And you're right, you do learn, you get better, and asking for feedback's really, really important. So this is like you should come in and do our seminars. I think that would be fantastic. Anyway, some other questions here. So from an aerodynamics point of view, which sectors in your view still have the potential to progress the furthest? I think you've kind of touched on that with your short haul things and changing short journeys to electric.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that would probably say that the biggest, if they can do it, is supersonic flight. In private jets with Rolls-Royce, and they always say that once you've flown corporate, you never want to fly first class. And the amount of business we see now on corporate jets is staggering. Corporate jets have gone mad through COVID because people can, and the biggest, if you've got the ability to spend $75 million on a corporate jet, the next step is to have a supersonic one, because and if they could get supersonic corporate jets, there's one Learjet that gets quite close, but it doesn't get through the sound barrier. If they could get that hop with aerodynamics, then I think they would be there. I use the exact, this always baffles me. We sold an aircraft to a Saudi prince, a passenger aircraft that he wanted as a corporate jet. And the only reason he wanted to buy it was because it had 4 engines, and he had plenty with 2 on it. And his second question was, can I take my Bentley in the cargo hold? He said, it doesn't fit. The door's too high. And he said, we'll just modify the door. And we're like, it's 30 million to do this one-time modification. And he said, I don't worry about that. As long as you can fit my throne and my swimming pool on board as well, we're good to go. So that's the type of guy that if there was a supersonic aircraft available, he'd have 10 of them. So I think aerodynamically, and if it's a bit like Formula One, the more you can push the boundary lines at the highest end, the more that feeds down through the whole ecosystem. So there'll be a benefit by a supersonic plane coming for the rest of aviation. So I think there is one in the United Airlines have signed up for 50 of one called the Super Boom or something, and that would be the kind of the real breakthrough. But it'll be quite difficult to do with sustainable fuel.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that's all very well, but what's the fuel consumption like? I mean, would it get there? But I don't know.
Yeah.
What somebody else has asked. This is a nice geeky question. I like these. What's your favourite aircraft that you've worked on?
My favourite aircraft. I mean, I could easily say the A380 because it's just so good. But I think the one that, and I would, if I asked the mechanics we work with, what was your favourite aircraft? Most people go back to one of the first aircraft they worked with, and that was the Jetstream 41. It was one of the first aircraft produced in Scotland. It wasn't the most technically reliable aircraft. So if there's anyone who knows anyone from British Aerospace, my twin brother used to work there, so I can say this openly. It wasn't that reliable. It wasn't a great passenger experience, but it was probably my favourite aircraft because it was the first one that I did any design work on. And we did, my twin brother and I were doing the same job. We were asked to redesign the baggage handle for the cargo door, which is the crappiest design job to do ever. But it was the one that we get the chance to do. And after that, we knew that was our bit on that aircraft. That was the baggage handle. It was the first aircraft we had some real design change on. So I think, yeah, that would be, that'd probably still be my favourite one. Whether it's any use or not, it's a different aircraft, is different. Just was my first proper aircraft, and that's the one I'm probably with the rose-tinted spectacles.
That's great. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to pick one of those questions that we've got in the Q&A, and maybe at some later stage, Geoff, we might send some of them to you if you could to maybe answer for students. I don't know. They're not. No, they wouldn't take much time. And then I'll ask you another question towards the end. But this is a perennial question. How can we get sufficient experience to get ready to embrace the professional field, especially after getting graduated? So I suppose as a general one, how important is work experience during your degree, and how can you give anybody any hints and tips on how to get that?
Yeah, I mean, I think work experience, the biggest thing that work experience will give you is effectively a job interview for 3 months. If you did a 3 months internship, it's the best way we always used to hire people. We'd almost put people through to last interview if they did well in internships. So they are useful. They're not going to get you the most exciting jobs for 3 months, but it's quite a good benchmark of will people get on with tasks they're given to do and get through them. But not everybody can do internships. But I think the one thing I would say in terms of getting experience, people always have to think there's kind of primary engineering companies that people will always apply to, but there are other companies outside of that where you can get just as good experience. I've got three guys that work for me, went through Singapore universities, went to Malaysia to work in what I would describe as component shops to get that experience. So they went down a couple of tiers into the supply chain and then came back up. So I think you have to it's a difficult thing, much more difficult thing now to get a job with all of the kind of LinkedIn and all these profiles that can appear. So you're fighting more than you were probably even in my time when it was emails didn't really exist as a medium at that stage. So getting experience, you have to think, where could I get it? Could it be in a component manufacturer? It doesn't always have to be in something that you would classify as the kind of the front line part of that engineering, but does it give you engineering experience? And ultimately, I've also seen people who've done very, very well. You can do an engineering degree, and then one of the guys I work with is an on-wing care mechanic, and he works on the tools, and he is fantastic because he has the technical knowledge and the hands-on knowledge, and that hands-on experience is a good way to come through, because if you've got a degree and hands-on, you're a really sellable asset. But there isn't an easy answer for that one, because it's a difficult thing to get experience without getting a job. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg, but try and think, where could you get it? Even if it's going into sustainable energy and then going into aviation, there's a way to do the two. So it's thinking wider than just the kind of the primary few companies that exist that make it.
I think it's a great lesson there is the fact that skills are transferable, and you can do something in one area, gain skills that are just as applicable to another. But listen, Geoff, we're nearly finished, unfortunately. I could talk all day to you, honestly, but just before we finish, I suppose, I know we're talking about air travel here, but if you imagine you had a time machine, right, and you could go back to speak to yourself in your final year at university, the way some of our people are, what would you say to yourself? What kind of message would you give yourself?
I think the one thing that I would always look back and say, trust yourself. Be confident in what you say. I always find I was quite confident around the sports pitches, and then when it came to engineering, I wouldn't have kind of said I was going to be the top student. You always doubt, do I really know that? Do I have enough engineering knowledge to do that? But your kind of degree is taking you to a point where you're able to understand documents. So I look at things now where I'm not using aeronautical engineering kind of lecture notes to work out what the technical problem of the day is. You're using the methodology. So trust yourself that you know enough. When you get a degree and it's an engineering, Bachelor of Engineering, honours, master's degree, you have fundamental knowledge. So trust that, and then be confident in what you're trying to do. There's a fine line between confident and arrogant, and that's always a difficult one, but be confident. And I would sit back and say, sometimes in the past, I wasn't confident enough to push my own case. And sometimes you have to, your best advocate is you. So you need to sell yourself. And I would say go and sell yourself a bit more than I did initially. But be humble with it. It's one of these difficult, how can you be humble but be confident and trust in what you do? But yeah, I think trust that you've got the right knowledge when you leave university to go and do something. And also be open that if you go into a job and don't like it after a couple of years, don't stay for 25 years. Go and do something else. but stay in a job. And I would always look back and say, whatever I was going to do, make sure I stay in it for at least 2 years, because I think you learn something from doing that.
Okay, that's great, Geoff. Well, folks, we're going to have to wrap it up there because we've got another event at 3. But Geoff, honestly, it's been great to listen to you. Your story's amazing, and you've been involved in some brilliant things. And it's been great to get a glimpse of the future as well, and also some great hints and tips on how people can perform well at interview and compete in that job market. So I think we'll wrap up there, folks. If your question wasn't answered, we'll be able to send them on to Geoff and get back to you. And I'll just hand over to Simone now. But thank you so much, Geoff. That's great. All the way from Singapore. Amazing.
I know. What an incredible discussion. Thank you so much, Geoff. That was really interesting even as a non-engineer, just to get some more insight about what you do and the challenges you face in your role, and all the interesting challenges that you've had. It was really interesting to hear about. So thank you very much for taking the time to share that with the students today. I'm sure they appreciate it. I can see by the little virtual claps that are coming on the screen there that everyone's really, really enjoyed it. So we really honestly can't thank you enough for your time today. And for those who want to stick around, at 3 o'clock, I do have Carol Ofafa, who is electrical engineer and supplies the energy or supplies electricity to Kenya. And is also an alumnus of the University of Glasgow. So she's a really interesting woman, and she's a big advocate for more women in engineering. So I do encourage you to stick around and listen to Carol's discussion and hear more about the really interesting work that she's doing in Kenya, not only supplying the country with electricity, but making sure that there's opportunities for women all over the world in engineering. So yes, that sounds really good. But having said all of that, just can't say thank you enough to Geoff and Stephen for their chat today and exploring a career in aerospace. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Pleasure.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Geoff.
Okay, bye-bye.